Welcome back to the Pro Series Podcast. This is episode 132, and today's guest is Deevo Tindall. He's an entrepreneur and brand marketing specialist. He teaches entrepreneurs from all around the world stand out in a competitive landscape. If you struggle with marketing or know nothing about marketing and just want to know the fundamentals or how to branch in or get help with it, this is a great episode for you. But before you get into this episode, please like, subscribe, and review this podcast on wherever you listen to podcasts. And now I hope you enjoy episode 132 with Deevo Tindall. Deevo, thank you so much for hopping on the Pro Series podcast today. Can't wait to talk to you about your business and some fun topics that I think a lot of viewership will find interesting.
I appreciate it, Eric. Thanks for having me on, man.
Yeah, I always like to start the podcast and kind of you give us an introduction on yourself, what your company is, and how you started.
Okay. Where do I go? I started off in the traditional route of a lot of people do, straight out of college, just joined the corporate ranks. Did that for almost 15 years, but simultaneously to that, I was sort of just doing some passion projects on the side, mainly photography, content creation before content creation was called content creation. And I didn't realize it was something I could make a profession out of, but I just felt like a lot of people in the corporate world, I just felt uncompelled. It wasn't something that I ultimately wanted to do, sitting in an office in a cubicle for the rest of my life. And so I set out to try to find ways that I could take the things that I really love doing best and build something with that. And so that led me into a pathway of running a photography studio, for which I still own since 2006. And then roughly about 2 years ago, I started to see a gap because I was working with a lot of small businesses and entrepreneurs. And I started to see a gap in me creating content for them, photography, video, etc., but their inability to do anything with the content. And so, it would just sort of sit on their laptop or their computer and just kind of collecting digital dust. And so I started finding ways to work with them in a marketing, branding, consulting capacity to help them take the content that I created for them and then do something with that to connect to an ideal audience. And that sort of led me into the world of branding and marketing, which I originally came from. And I realized that there was just a large gap for entrepreneurs, small businesses that didn't necessarily have the resources, the capital, or all of the above to run their marketing and their content creation simultaneously. So I created this brand called Fusion Creative, which takes a holistic approach to content creation, but it strategically implements that based upon branding, creating crafting your brand message, and then amplifying that through all the digital marketing tools. So that's where we are today.
That's very cool. I mean, like we were just talking before we press record, and a lot of the viewership is, in real estate, design, or just an entrepreneur in general. And I feel like a lot of the people that I have on this podcast all have this same trait that I don't meaningly find people to put on the podcast that have this trait. It just magically happens when they come on, and it's that they worked in a corporate job, or they had a job that they thought was the right thing to do coming out of school, and then realize, no, that's not it. And they kind of go into their passion project that becomes their career. So it's kind of cool to see this common trait that just keeps coming. Every single episode is the same thing, which is so cool because I didn't mean for that to come out. But when you went from corporate to this job before your job you're doing now, was it something you were doing on the side? And when you took that leap of faith, what got you there? Was there like a rock bottom that you hit where in your corporate world job that you kind of wanted to segue into this passion project?
So two questions. What was the catalyst that made me leave? And then once I made that leap, what was my transitory route around that? How did that experience go? Is that what I sort of heard you say?
Yep, correct.
There wasn't. I wish I had some really compellingly fantastic story to tell you. It was really sort of a slow trickling leak, to be honest with you. Um, I just I just always felt sort of a tug that there was something more that I was supposed to do.
Okay.
And I'm an artistic guy by nature, but I also have, because I've done business all my life and I'm on my fifth business now, I also just love building things. So I had that entrepreneurial spirit. I just never knew I was an entrepreneur. Like as a kid, I have two daughters and we joke they're teenagers now. And I had my first business by the time I was 8 years old, mowing lawns and like going
Mm,
around the neighborhood. And it was just a necessity thing for me. I didn't realize what it actually was. It's true entrepreneurialism, right? And so, and I'm like, we walked uphill both ways in the snow, and you guys can't even figure out how to do anything right now. So I was like, I was an
yeah.
entrepreneur at 8 years old, girlfriend. So don't tell me what I. So anyhow, in terms of to answer your question, it was just really a slow trickle. I felt uninspired. Um,
Mhm.
I I would sit in my cubicle and imagine myself being in my cubicle for 50 years doing the same thing, and I just was like, this is just not something that I don't think humans I just remember thinking, I don't think humans are designed for this sort of a lifestyle. I don't think that
Mm,
I'm certainly not designed for it. I'm an active guy, I like to travel, and I was just sort of sitting there doing something. And it wasn't, I'd like to just point out, I learned a boatload of things from that experience that are now helping me run my business today. But I wasn't my own boss. I didn't have freedom. I wasn't able to do the things that I really wanted to do that are like my passion. And so, at one point, now to answer part two of your question, I got laid off a couple of times and they would rehire me. And I was like, I don't really want to be on this hamster wheel. There's this
mm.
like I'm just a number, right?
Yeah,
I'm replaceable. So how can I create my own legacy so that at least I'm responsible for my own laying myself off? And I started off working part-time for other photographers, free time for other photographers. I was their bitch. Whatever they needed, I would do. And then anyone I could find that wanted photography, I was like, I will photograph you, whatever it is, I'll photograph you. And so I would go to my 9 to 5, if you will, and then I would come home and do photography until it got dark. And so, and that just sort of the word got out. I started developing my craft, and before you know it, I was taking on paying clients, and then here I am today.
that's awesome. So
Yeah.
today in Fusion, you're helping out companies? Is it just in your area, or are you helping out companies throughout the country?
All over the world, actually.
Oh,
Most of my business can be done. The model that I have built can be done anywhere in the world.
hmm,
Um, in terms of photography and content creation, a lot of my clients will fly me to them to create content for them, or I've developed relationships in the cities where I have clients where I'll have partner collaborative photographers or videographers that I'll outsource work to. So, yeah, it's all over anywhere on the planet, really.
cool. So do you have it? Like I said in the beginning, I'm an interior designer, and this podcast kind of started as an interior designer. I have so many designers that DM me trying to figure out how to get their work publicized. So basically, they're trying to find photographers and videographers to do their jobs. Have you had any experience with designers and doing photographing their projects or getting creatives for their projects?
Yeah, I actually have two interior designers that I work for and an architect.
Oh,
So,
okay,
yeah,
very
I do have
cool.
some experience with them.
So when it comes to going into a publication, do you have any advice for somebody like that? I mean, obviously, it's best to hire someone like you that is a professional that could actually get a great picture of your space and actually be able to shoot that to a publication. Because obviously, lots of the publications, at least the ones I've talked to, mostly the interior design ones, they kind of send someone out to do the actual photography for it. But do you have any advice for a designer or an architect or someone that does something creative that is trying to hire someone like you? What are they supposed to look for when they're trying to like interview someone like you to make sure that they're the correct person for their brand?
Yeah, no, it's a good question. So there's a few things, and it's not really dissimilar from most people who are hiring a professional photographer. Do your research first and foremost, but
Mm-hmm.
before you get into the phase of hiring, be very, very clear on what you want your content to say about your brand. So, and you can say different messages based upon where you're trying to distribute this. Is it for an electronic magazine? Is it for a website? Are you submitting to a formal print magazine? And being very clear on what that message is that you want to convey, right? So that when that information is submitted to the publication, it's telling the right message that the viewer sees and is sort of like, this is the story, right? So first and foremost, have some foundational clarity on that. And then in terms of finding a videographer or photographer, do your research, read the reviews, make sure they've got experience in that sphere, because you don't really want to hire a wedding photographer to come in and shoot interior designs if they've never done interior designs. It's a completely different ball of wax. So do some research, find people, talk to other designers who you admire, for example. Like, you can do some basic Google research or social media research and find other content that someone has created and reach out to them and say, who did this work for you, and see if they have a referral. So use your network, and do some research, read reviews, interview the client or the photographer. And can you imagine spending a decent amount of time with them, right? Because
Hmm.
they're going to be in your space. Is this someone you can trust? Is this someone? Because a lot of photographers, for whatever reason, they have this reputation of being fickle. I'm not really sure why. I can't tell you how many times I get phone calls from people whose photographer didn't show up, or
Oh.
something weird happened. And so, for whatever reason, it does happen in the industry. So just make
Hmm.
sure that you've crossed your T's and dotted your I's on it.
Yeah. When it comes to branding, I feel like any entrepreneur, they miss the boat on a lot of their branding and their creatives, especially on social media or their websites or something. What do you have any common things that you see on social media? Maybe someone you followed or someone you went to high school with, that you're seeing all these mistakes that most of these people or entrepreneurs that are finding these issues that are in common with most people, like the number one issue they make when they start branding. I mean, lots of the time they don't have the budget to hire someone like you. Once they do, they will hire someone like you. But in the beginning, what are they finding? What are you finding that is a mistake that most people are doing?
They don't have clarity on what their own purpose is and what their own value is. They're not clear on what problem they're solving for their client. And so
Gotcha.
consequently, they're not targeting the right client, and they're ending up with work that is less than inspirational for them, or the message that they're sending out to their audience, whether it's on social media or on their website, it's unclear and confusing. And
Mm.
so they're attracting the wrong type of people. And because they're not clear on their own message, the message they try to share with everyone else is also unclear. And so really setting a foundation, and that's what branding is, by the way. A lot of people think branding is just, having a cool website and a logo. It's a really nebulous term, which is why I have to be very careful when I talk about branding. I have to make sure I throw in marketing, because everyone understands marketing. It's like, I'll spend money on marketing, but branding, I don't need branding. So
Yeah.
being very clear about what branding is, and at the core of everything, branding is the message that everyone else sees, hears, listens, smells, tastes about your company. What is it that you stand for? What problem do you solve? Why are you in this business? Who do you want to work with? And most importantly, what's the exchange worth to me to do business with you? And a lot of entrepreneurs don't take the time to establish that, and that gets them sort of in doing these rework loops over time.
Yeah, it's kind of funny you said that because there is a lot of entrepreneurs. If you ask them what is your messaging or what is your branding, they'll have no idea what you're talking about, or they just never thought about it, never took the time to actually think about what their message, what they want their message to be to their following or their key customers.
Yeah, I did a workshop 2 weeks ago for a large networking group here in Charlotte, and it was centered around sort of your 30-second elevator pitch and just being very clear on what you do, why you do it, and how you do it. And when I start off the workshop, I have this little exercise, and I just randomly pick people out of the crowd and I ask them to tell me their elevator pitch. And 30 seconds, 60 seconds, and there wasn't a single one of them that I called on that could actually clearly, succinctly, quickly say exactly what they do. And so it's an interesting, people get a little bit gun shy on it, right? So, like, I don't really want to talk about myself, so I'm not going to take the time to craft that. But what people don't realize is, like, that is your message. That is how you're going to connect with people. So you've got to be very, very clear on what you do and
Hmm.
why you do it.
Yeah, that's funny that you say that. Yeah, I've heard these elevator pitches of people talk about what they do, and then I'm not in that industry that they're talking about, so I have no idea what they're talking about. To the point, like their messaging is just too niche to their market that I have no idea what they're talking about. It's to me, it's ruining their brand because I could be a customer of theirs, but they're being too technical in the world of their industry that
Yeah.
you're losing the messaging.
It's a great observation. So, keep it simple, stupid,
Yeah.
and just make sure that whatever you're saying, there's a fine line you have to walk in that messaging, in terms of like your 30-second elevator pitch, if you will, because you do want to niche into a space so that you're
Hmm.
targeting and attracting the right type of people that you want to work with. But at the same time, you don't want to remove potentials like yourself that aren't really necessarily in that niche but have some crossover. So it's really important that what you say about yourself and what you do It's not nebulous, but it has a little bit of more comprehensive value, but still hones in on a targeted niche. Does that make sense?
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
How about I want to talk about this first topic is empathy when it comes to branding or just entrepreneurship and in general. And you kind of had off camera kind of talked about you were working with a client, but what is something with empathy and why are you so passionate about it being part of the customer or the person's branding?
Well, I think a lot of people, myself included, we're so eager to sell what we do.
Hmm.
We're so eager to make money and we're so eager to get our brand out there and be heard. And, now you have social media, so you're competing with everyone else in the same sea, trying to say the exact same thing. So you're trying to connect with all these people. So we think, and it's inherently built into us that we have to sell ourselves to everybody. And that is true. But there's a difference between selling yourself and selling all the time. And so I think if you can reframe that paradigm from serve first, sell second, you're implementing empathy into your process by the very nature of what empathy is. And so instead of approaching somebody with how many times do you get an email on a daily basis where somebody's like offering you a program, right?
Oh, all
Or
the time.
selling you. Everyone
Yeah.
sells you. Everyone's selling you all day long. And I'm not saying that you shouldn't sell because ultimately you have to sell, right? That's how you stay in business. But I encourage people to think of it in a different context, and that is serving first and using empathy to understand what it is that your client needs, where are they coming from, and don't just blast stuff out. Like take the time, especially I have a client right now who's doing a DM strategy and just writing up these canvassed emails and just sending them out. And it's great. Like he's just throwing out emails left and right. And he's like, I have like a 2% read response rate. And so I take a look at his messaging and like he's sending the same message to everybody. And in most cases, people can pick up on that. Like we're really savvy consumers now, right? We have so much information at our fingertips. Like you can sniff out a sale in a matter of seconds, right? And
Oh yeah.
so I was like, let's make a couple of tweaks to this. Instead of just focusing on canvassing an entire distribution list, do some research on the individual types of clients. And there's all kinds of tools out there that you can do that, right? So Sales Navigator, Cleverly, all sorts of different tools out there where you can actually do some research on who your ideal client is and then craft a very specific message to these individuals as opposed to like this blanket message. And so by changing that approach, you're being more empathetic to who your potential buyer is. And instead of just selling to them, you're offering solutions and you're offering value to them. So instead of just selling to them, invite them to have a quick virtual meeting with you, or have a virtual coffee date, or offer them some tidbits of information, or maybe you just wrote a really cool blog post that can solve some of their problems because you saw on their latest post that they're really struggling with leadership. Well, maybe you have a leadership blog post that you can write and be like, "Hey, I saw your post on LinkedIn the other day, and it just so happened to have this blog post on leadership that I'd like to share with you." But again, it's reframing the context from give me, give me, give me, buy for me, buy for me, buy for me, to adding value, serving, not selling. And so at the core of what I believe in my philosophy is empathy is at the cornerstone of that.
Bringing service to the front, you saying serving is a great way to think about it. I think when we brought up empathy, maybe a viewer might be like, of course, you have to have empathy for a customer. That's like a no-brainer. But I feel like people think of it in a different way, like how you have empathy for a family member or something, that you're really diving deep on a personal level. And it doesn't have to be that personal. It just, you need to realize that they're a human being and you're not just, they're just a consumer that's just going to buy your product because you
Oh,
need to
you're
build a relationship.
absolutely, man. You're dead on. Relationship is the key word there. So empathy is a variety of things. It is what you said, your friend just had a tragic accident, and so you're listening empathetically to his story, right? But
Yeah.
it's listening, it's actively listening, by the way,
Hmm.
which is different from just I'm here in the room.
Yeah.
It's listening and not trying to put your 2 cents in every single time, right? So how many times do you catch yourself, people will be in a conversation, you're like, I, I got something to say about that. I really want to add it. It's like reframing from what they had to say to what I have to say, right? So be an active listener, validating people, listening to their problems, understanding and making making sure that you're very clear on it. Having some mindfulness in the space. I think a lot of times we lose track of like we're so focused on the end game that we forget to be present for the process, right? We just want to make the sell, but we forget like along the way, it's the journey, it's the relationship we build, the nurturing that we do with the clients, all those different things. Asking questions, real questions, like getting to know their needs, not just coming in with the solution, and then being able to when you do all those things, you're able to offer a real solution. Able to offer real support, right? Instead of just like throwing a can at them with that you gave to everybody else.
Yeah. I kind of want to bounce off of that. That's something that always bothered me. Like if a salesperson came into me when I was really being a full-time designer and they always had to relate to every single thing I said, like they have a story that has to like relate to it. I'm like, no, I'm not going to buy from you. It's always about yourself. You don't want that as a consumer to be able to buy from someone that just is all about themselves.
So what was it about that particular scenario? And let's just pick one that really bothered you the most.
I mean, I'm thinking of someone right now that literally every single time you brought up anything to do with, like I'm a designer, so if I brought up some type of material that they're selling, say it's countertop, and I would say a disadvantage on it, they would have to bring up something that they thought about that disadvantage as well, that they agreed, which is fine. I'm fine with you agreeing, but you always have to have some type of story to it. Or, oh, well, I had a customer use this in this scenario. Let me bring this picture up, or something like that. It's not always about you as the person selling the product. You have to like be able to serve your client in a way that is actually going to suit them because every client's different. You're not going to serve um, Tim Smith and Dolly the same way. They're two different people, and being able to read that from that person, I bet you any money he could have saw that in my face that like I was completely taken out. Like I was done with him after he kept bringing up himself.
Yeah, it is interesting. I think the term is called cognitive empathy, where people feel like they have to dispense their piece of knowledge or their piece of wisdom to you to make you understand their perspective. But when they're doing that, you're basically negating everything that you told him. You're saying your situation, that's great, but I've got one that's better than yours. And so I think you're spot on. And so instead of always trying to jump in with something, it's really important that you're listening and asking questions so that you can better understand what it is. And so people love I mean, why do we podcast? Like I love coming on shows and answering questions because I like to talk about myself, right? So it's like people love to talk about themselves. So how can you reframe that so that when you're working with somebody, you can listen first? My grandfather used to tell me you have two ears and one mouth for a reason. Like there's a reason you have one mouth. So listen to people, ask questions, have a clear understanding, build something first, and then move into the next phase of it.
Absolutely. I'm actually, as you're talking, I see that quote behind you, and it's kind of really relating to a lot of what we're talking about. Is it unlearn everything?
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, that's such an important thing when you're becoming an entrepreneur and you're trying to relate to a customer. You're trying to take all your beliefs that you've learned from your younger. And I think that's a lot of the roadblocks that we as entrepreneurs kind of develop as we get older. So it's kind of cool that you had that up.
That's a very introspective perspective. So spot on. I have a therapist that I meet with regularly, and yes, I'm fucked up just like everyone else.
Hey, I
But
mean, therapy is a thing that everyone should be doing nowadays.
ah, dude, if there's anything that I get from therapy, it's being put in my place, first of all, but second of all, realizing that everything you just said, the context that we hold is based upon an old paradigm and it might not work anymore. And so unlearning that and reframing that and stepping into a new set of knowledge and a new set of tools. I don't know who said it. I think it was Gandhi. It's like if you're doing the same thing every single day and you're getting the same outcome that you don't like, then you might want to change the things you're doing every day so you have a different outcome. And I'm reframing that a little bit. But yeah, it's your context is it drives everything you do. And if that is warped or skewed, then you're gonna have a warped or skewed outcome.
Yeah, and I think that comes to marketing and branding too, because I know so many entrepreneurs that only brand and market their company in the way they view the world or how they view the product, when their key demographic is not viewing the world that same way. So being able to see it from a different point of view. So not just having a counselor for your personal problems, but having a counselor like yourself that is coming in, kind of dissecting the marketing, uh, the branding, everything, how it's seen from an outsider is so, so important.
That's very insightful. If you're not, if you, if you're not able to put yourself in the shoes of your client and you're in a service-based industry, you should probably not be in a service-based industry. Because if you're selling for what you want, if you're creating for what you want, then you're going to be the only one that's going to buy that. You have to find products, you have to find services, you have to find something and make sure, like you just said, being very, very clear on what my buyers want out of this process, not what do I want out of this process.
Yeah. Yeah. I love the conversations that we were having, and I feel like we could be talking for another like hour and a half for this topic, but I like to keep them nice and short and sweet. And I kind of want to end on where people could find your company and follow you, maybe social media or your website,
Mhm.
just so people could learn more about you and maybe even reach out for helping on their side of the bit for their business.
Thank you for asking. It's fusioncreativebranding.com is the website, and you can find me on Instagram or LinkedIn under Fusion Creative Branding or Fusion Photog. I have two different handles. One's my photography, and the other one is my creative business. So, yeah,
Awesome. Well, Deevo, thank you again so much for taking time out of your day to come on the Pro Series podcast. Can't wait to get this one out.
thanks, Eric. I appreciate the opportunity, man. Good
Thank you.
conversation.